Hello everyone, Storm here, and today I'll be doing another what if scenario for Telltale's The Walking Dead. This time around we're going to be looking at Omid's shocking death at the beginning of Season 2, and undoing that in order to see what changes he makes to the story alive. Now this was actually a suggestion from a channel member named Fonklocks, or rather they suggested Omid and Christa survive, but I think it'd be better to cover both separately, so maybe we'll get to Christa another time. But for now, let's get into what if Omid survived. To keep Omid alive, I'll simply say that upon his entry, the bathroom door doesn't make the sound it did canonically. This allows Omid to grab the gun from Michelle and aim it at her. She immediately gets scared and Omid shakily tells her that she needs to leave, clearly uncomfortable with even having to aim the gun at the person. Michelle then runs off, and Omid makes sure Clementine is alright. At the same time, Christa leaves the other bathroom to see Michelle running away and rushes to ask Omid what's going on. Omid tries to ensure her that everything's okay and explains the scenario of the woman getting Clementine's gun and using it against her. Christa degrades Clem for leaving her gun unattended, saying that someone could have gotten hurt, but she stops, remembering that she is still talking to a child. Christa apologizes, saying that they should get going. The three move on, at some point running into Michelle again. She seems to have switched gears, feeling bad about what she was doing. It wasn't right to threaten a kid the way she did. She was just desperate for supplies. Omid, who tries to see the best in everyone, talks Christa into allowing Michelle to join them. Christa doesn't like the idea, so it comes down to Clem's decision. If she chooses to accept this, Christa will relent and allow Michelle into their group, and if you choose not to, Michelle gets sent away. But regardless, she ends up stealing from the group's camp in the night. But the only person awake to see it happen is Omid, who tries to convince her not to do it. But she chooses to escape with what she has stolen, and doesn't shoot Omid this time due to their prior encounter. He tells Christa and Clem about what had happened, with Christa saying that she was right about her. Sadly, Christa still loses her baby, as they've been living on scraps for a while now, and having their supplies stolen definitely did not help. This puts them in the same spot they were in the canon events, but now they have Omid present as well. Things would be the most split they've ever been between the two, as the death of their baby was quite difficult for both of them to process. Omid is very optimistic about the future, but Christa is obviously still very affected. Not as much as canon, since Omid is there to keep them together and she doesn't have to bear the sole burden of being Clementine's protector and provider. Upon seeing the campfire dwindling, Omid offers to get more wood, but Christa opts to go instead. She's been far more hands-on with things after seemingly losing her hope of fulfilling a normal mother role. Because of this choice, it is still Christa who gets caught by the bandits. Upon hearing the conflict, Omid and Clem go to check out what's happening. They discover Christa is surrounded, and Omid tells Clementine to get out of there while he does something. But he doesn't even know what to do at this point. They don't have any significant weaponry, so Clem can either just hold on to hope that he'll figure it out as she escapes, or try and help him. Clem and Omid both toss rocks at the enemies, which opens a spot for Christa to run. They run away as well, with Omid fighting off their attackers, but now they also have Christa to track down. After being surrounded by walkers, Clem ends up falling into the river, with Omid doing so as well in pursuit. Clementine wakes up on the shore to Omid trying to make sure she's alive. In the version where Clem ran alone, Omid would say that he tried finding her in Christa but got forced into the water by the bandits. They make their way around, running into Sam the dog. Omid is happy to see a dog, looking at the positive side of their situation, before saying that Christa would have loved to find one, which reminds him of what transpired the night before. Clementine makes an attempt to comfort her friend, and they continue finding food. The dog turns on Clementine, biting her arm and startling Omid. He's not really sure what to do in this scenario, but after clearing his head, he runs to the girl's aid and accidentally drops Sam onto the spike. This is a saddening sight for the duo, but Omid comforts Clementine, suggesting that they leave this behind. They need to find some sort of medical supplies for her arm before it gets infected, like his wound did in Season 1. After running from walkers, Clementine starts slowing down and fading, and so Omid carries her until they meet Pete and Luke, who help get them to safety. After Omid mentions Clementine's bite, Luke sees it and gets surprised, not knowing whether it was a walker or not. It would probably be smaller this time around, since Omid helped get Sam off of Clementine earlier than she did alone canonically. They explain what happened, and Pete and Nick take them back to their cabin. There, they have Carlos take a look, and he declares that she will stay in the shed for the night. He also says that Omid must stay there as well, as they can't risk this being a trap of some kind. Omid is extremely upset about Clementine being stuck in a shed when she needs medical care, especially since she might be all he has left. Carlos understands his feelings, but he has to think about his family as well. If she is not turned by morning, they will treat her. At night, Omid lashes out in front of Clementine as he can't take the stress of what just happened, and Carlos would rather wait things out than try and keep a little girl alive. Clementine goes into their house to try and find supplies for her arm, as Omid can't fit through the hole in the shed. She returns with the proper medical tools needed, and Omid agrees to stitch her up. It sucks, but it works. The two deal with the walkers that sneak in, and the cabin group arrives to see Clementine's arm stitched up. After that, Omid and Clem are invited inside, where they're scolded for their thievery, but ultimately no one can really blame them. Rebecca is rude to Clem and Omid, which Omid doesn't stand for, but Clem can calm it down or be ruthless, shocking Omid too. The two go on Pete and Nick's fishing trip, with Omid going after the person Clementine doesn't. He's spooked to be somewhere without Clem, as she's all he has left at this point. Pete is supportive, but Nick is just sulking, leading to Omid lashing out at him for not caring about a little girl. However, as Nick opens up about his loss, Omid bonds with him, trying to escape with him, but sadly being forced to leave him behind. As for Pete, it's the same way. Omid and Clementine return to the cabin at similar times and stay behind while the others go looking for everyone else. The two are happy to be reunited, and Omid is pretty much a yes man to Clem's decision on training Sarah. He can respect Carlos's wishes, but also recognize the need for Sarah to be prepared so that they never repeat the situation with the girl from the rest stop again. Carver shows up, and Omid answers the door, trying to be as friendly as possible. He's not exactly the best at lying though, so as Clem, you can decide to step in and help make the story more believable, or leave it to Omid to not make yourself known. Either way, Carver leaves after getting enough information from them. Carlos and the others return, with Omid briefing them on what just took place. The gang leave, finding Nick, and traveling for a while. Omid and Alvin would become friends here, as they both seem very friendly, and Omid would want to protect Rebecca and her baby to make up for Christa and theirs. They eventually arrive at the bridge, which Luke and Clementine scout first. Upon seeing Clem in danger, Omid springs ahead and tries to catch up with them, as they barely escape the walkers on the bridge. They run into Matthew, who seems like a nice guy. Nick and Omid then show up, with Omid telling Nick to put down the gun, as they don't want any trouble from this guy. Luckily this works, and our new friend Matthew gets to live. He lets them have some of his supplies before taking them up to the ski lodge. There they would meet Walter, Sarita, and reunite with Kenny as well. Omid and Clementine are both happy to see him, and everyone goes in to enjoy the night together. During their talks, Ken wonders what happened to Christa, but Omid has very little information. Only brief glimpses of her as they all tried to flee. There would be no conflict with Walter whatsoever, since Matthew is perfectly fine. So when the generator is tapped and walkers show up, Nick is guaranteed to survive, as he has no reason to let Nick die. It would also just be way easier to handle since Omid and Matthew are both here. I also think Matthew would go with Kenny to check on the generator as a way to quell Sarita wanting to go with Kenny. Matthew asks Sarita to keep track of Walter for her and then goes off. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to my friend Tyler, who's helping me out with this video and wanted to record a bit.
Carver and his men show up, taking everything into the lodge and tying them up. Clementine can choose to stay hidden with Alvin and Rebecca or run outside to find Kenny, Luke, and Matthew. Luke is nowhere to be found, but Kenny and Matthew are both hunting Carver's men. They end up killing the random goon as well as injuring Carver's shoulder right off the bat. So Carver guns down Walter, which enrages Matthew. Both he and Kenny gear up for another shot as Carver shoots Carlos in the arm to match the shot he just took. Kenny and Matthew don't back down, but if Clem went out, she can try to appeal to either of them to make them stop. No matter what, at least one of them will shoot though. The first shot barely misses Carver, and the last optional shot injures Troy. As for Alvin, since an additional shot is fired no matter what, Carver still kills him even if Clementine protects him. The gang then goes back to Howe's, where Carver keeps them to do work. Omid and Matthew aren't enjoying this much more than anyone else, with Kenny being able to get Matt in on their plans to disrupt Reggie. He's on the warpath against Carver for taking Walter from him. As for Omid, he agrees they should get out, but he doesn't want to act reckless. Not much really changes in this episode besides added dialogue for Matthew and Omid. Luke rejoins the group after being found out for the radio, Kenny loses his eye, and Bonnie joins them in their plans to take down Carver, which, like in canon, they do. After Kenny has Carver down, Matthew stays with Beck to watch what happens, but Omid refuses to do so, trying to urge Matthew and Clementine away too. They eventually get going, using the walker guts to escape Howe's before Carlos is shot. This sends Sarah spiraling and causes walkers to close in. Luckily, with Matthew around though, they are able to defend a little bit better, and Sarita is able to come out unscathed. Luke and Nick head after Sarah, and Nick gets shot in the shoulder, with Clementine getting separated from Kenny, Matthew, Sarita, and Mike, and would join up with Jane and Rebecca. Omid is also present as he stuck with Rebecca to make sure her and the baby were safe. They all reconvene at Parker's Run, but now Kenny is much more level-headed without the deaths of all of his new friends. They would make a plan to search the area, with Jane agreeing to go and find Luke and the others alongside Clementine. Omid decides to tag along as he wants to keep Clem safe. Because Kenny is still put together and can watch Rebecca, Mike and Bonnie can check out the history museum, but she replies that he has actual father experience, so he should watch over Rebecca. Her and Matt can handle themselves, and he reluctantly agrees, and our little squads head out. With Omid present, Jane isn't able to form as big of a connection with Clementine, but she does still try to give pointers and whatnot. They eventually ride up on where Luke and Sarah are hiding out, finding a zombified Nick stuck to a fence. They take care of it before continuing to make it on inside. Due to Omid being present and possibly holding the door, Clementine would likely get an extra chance to slap Sarah if you tried convincing her again. So you're more than likely to save Sarah. Omid would be completely traumatized if Clem leaves her behind though, wondering if they could have done anything to save her. The 4 or 5 make it to Parker's Run, where Mike and Bonnie have returned with the water. Sure, they don't have Clem to squeeze through the gap, but I think they would have tried to do so, or at least reach with their hands. The walker would have sprung up and Mike would have kicked down the door the same way he did canonically. They definitely aren't catching any raccoons though. Since Sarita and Matthew already checked out the other spot, they'd show up soon too, but they never run into Arvo as he only showed up later on. Matthew and Sarita point out that the place looks safe and it's above ground, so they should go for the night, and Kenny and the others then pack up and start leaving. They arrive to see Arvo putting a bag into a trash can before trying to leave. Kenny wants to know what he's up to, so they all approach him. Kenny is aggressive towards Arvo, but Arvo tells him nothing but the truth. The bag has medicine for his sister, and Kenny is obviously opting to take that for his own people, as there is the chance of Arvo lying. Jane does agree, and so does Rebecca, since she's the most in need of those meds. Matthew backs Kenny up reluctantly, but Luke, Omid, Sarita, Mike, and Bonnie are all at varying levels of disagreement. I think Clementine would have the ultimate decision here, so it's more or less a tie. Since they left way earlier and have Luke and probably Matthew securing the area, they would have never been attacked by the herd. Jane leaves in the night, and our group would then argue on where to go out next. Sarita and Matthew are likely more willing to wait for Rebecca to recover, so it's possible that it isn't a choice when they leave. No matter what though, they encounter Arvo again with the Russians attacking them, and Rebecca would still turn, and either Clementine or Kenny handle that, which causes the gunfight. But with 3 or 4 more people in play in such close range, our group isn't going to walk away unscathed. I think this is where we would see the death of Sarita being killed in battle, and this would enrage both Kenny and Matthew, with Kenny taking in Arvo as a hostage, and Matthew would try to flank the final enemy, but luckily for him, Jane returns and kills him. Sarita bleeds out in Kenny's arms, and he cries out while holding her. After this happens, he would begin to lose his mind like how he did canonically earlier in the season, but now it's at this point in the series and he would be way more aggressive towards Arvo. And Omid, along with everybody else, would try to get him to calm down. They eventually do so, but they still tie up Arvo and continue moving on, and eventually reach the house that Arvo told them about in canon. Here, Jane warns Clem and Omid about Kenny and his downward spiral, and same with Matthew. Losing a loved one can break people, and Omid is kind of taken aback by this as she pretty much just spat in Omid's face. He's been holding it together despite having just lost Christa, and she's looking down on other people going through the same thing as him. Both Kenny and Matthew are good people, and they shouldn't just abandon them because of their pain. There's still a way back, and after Omid says that, Jane would apologize and walks ahead of them. The group makes a stop at a power plant where Clementine has to get Kenny, Matthew, Jane, Sarah, and Omid to join the fire. Kenny is pretty similar to the canon interaction as he has no reason to blame Clementine for Sarita's death since she was nowhere near her. His wound is way more raw now though, so he'd likely be easily agitated, making it hard for him to rejoin the group for the night. Jane is the same as in canon, just with her wanting to amend things with Omid. He seems nice and she didn't want to make him feel weak, because he isn't, and Clementine can offer to tell him for her or get Jane to do it herself. Matthew would be a cool one since he's obviously taking things hard, but he's not quite as far along as Kenny. As you talk about Walter, Kenny, and Sarita, he tells Clementine that he feels different from before. He sees Kenny doing reckless things and he's always right next to him. But seeing Kenny beat down Arvo makes him wonder if this is really the path for him. It'd be nice to finally see Sarah break out of her panic state, but it would probably be hard. And lastly, Omid. Despite the what if being about him, he hasn't had all that much to do so far, and I think we'd finally see him at his most vulnerable, really wondering where Christa is and if she's even out there anymore. He wishes they got to spend more time with each other and not fighting for their lives, just living them. He's been keeping his composure this whole time, but what Jane said really hit him. Omid would likely be guaranteed to return to the group as he is the people person of the group. But with that, the next day arrives, and our group would find an icy path to the house where they are forced to cross. Arvo goes running, causing Kenny and Mike to chase after. Luke gets stuck on a rough patch of ice, and Clem, Bonnie, and Matthew are left to cover him. No matter what, Luke falls in, but the changes arise here. If Clementine tried to lead Matthew from his downward spiral, he'd break the ice and go after Luke. This allows him to save Luke, sacrificing himself. And this also happens if Clementine falls in with Luke. But if Clementine instead comforted Matthew, and how he isn't being reckless. Instead of telling him the truth, he would only pull Clementine up if she went under. So the combinations of survivors are Matthew alone, Matthew and Bonnie, or Luke and Bonnie. This is really cool because it means half of our group is now determinant with Matthew, Luke, Bonnie, and Sarah. The people who fell in rest by the fire while Kenny beats up Arvo. Omid and Jane make him stop and they would find the food Arvo promised. Kenny works to fix up the truck while everyone else hangs tight and figures out what to do. Once Clementine wakes, she'd be able to interact with all of her friends. If Matthew sacrificed himself for Luke, Bonnie would be grateful for him and apologize to Clem for trying to make her help him. She wouldn't have made it. And if Matthew's alive, he'd probably help Kenny with the truck. As for Luke, he's still recovering from his leg, rib, and probably hypothermia, so he's just chilling. He's grateful that Matthew saved him and glad they all made it out. He hopes they can do the right thing for Sarah and AJ as well. Sarah herself isn't doing so hot, but she'd be feeling better if Luke is still alive. Last is Omid, who hopes Clementine can keep Kenny stable. As Clementine would then approach Kenny, Matthew says that he's all hers as he walks away to finally take a rest. Or not, if he's dead. Kenny is either glad Matthew's alive or is sad that he's dead. Or if Matthew didn't go under the water, he just wouldn't make a comment at all.
Alrighty, thank you Tyler for helping in this video, and now it's time for me to finish it up. Kenny is able to fix the truck, and everyone gathers to decide where they plan on going. In the Wellington camp, we have Kenny, Omid, and potentially Matthew. Opposed to Wellington, we've got Jane, Mike, and possibly Bonnie, Luke, and Sarah. Though Sarah isn't really getting a vote, let's be honest. Clementine can choose who to back up here, but given that Christa was heading for Wellington, Omid is not budging. They decide to sleep on it for the night, but that goes wrong when Mike and Arvo make an attempt to leave with their stuff. If Luke is dead, Bonnie will also join them, but I don't see her leaving if Luke is still there. And I also don't think Luke is going anywhere, because he's just too hopeful in the group and doesn't want to leave Clem behind. However, maybe Matthew would if you add him, since he was kinda going down a selfish path. I could also equally see him staying, due to just how much he's bonded with the group, and also Kenny is still there and maybe he wants to help his friend. But anyway, Clementine is shot, causing Omid and the others to run outside. They get on the road as soon as possible with Matthew/Luke sitting on the back of the truck alongside Bonnie if she's there. Sarah sits with Clem and Omid in the back seat and everyone is happy to see her wake up. Luke/Matthew go with him and Bonnie too if she's there. Walkers eventually show up and Omid drives away, crashing due to the snow and the dead. The three run away with AJ and possibly Sarah, eventually arriving at the rest stop. Omid and Clementine make it there first, finding Kenny alone. He says that he lost the others in the blizzard. Jane shows up too, but without AJ, causing Kenny to run away and search. Omid is freaked out by this, as AJ represents his second chance, so he starts questioning Jane rapidly. She apologizes, telling him that she'll explain later. Right now, there's no time. And she's right, as Kenny returns, angrily attacking Jane, with Omid being too shaken to react at the moment. Clementine tries to stop them, which snaps Omid back into it, and he gets in between. He tells Jane that whatever happened, she needs to explain right now, but she says she's not going to waste her breath. Kenny and Jane begin their fight, with Omid physically stepping in only to take random shots from Kenny or be dodged by Jane. Since he can't really do anything to stop them, Clem has to take it into her own hands, either shooting Kenny or letting him kill Jane. If the latter happens, Omid calls Kenny insane. Alternatively, if Clem shoots Kenny, Omid is less angry at Jane since she was mainly defending herself. But that swiftly changes when they find out AJ is still alive and Jane did all of this to prove a point. And then, Omid would call her insane. In both scenarios, he goes on a rant about how everything they just did was pointless now. They lost everyone, and they just put Clementine and possibly Sarah through that. Jane was right. Some people are too far gone. He wants to get the kids away from them, but it's ultimately Clementine's decision where she goes. Jane and Kenny have the same scenes if they're left behind, but Omid would absolutely be gobsmacked on why she's staying with someone that unhinged. He doesn't want them to take AJ, but it's not looking like he's got much of a choice anymore. So Clementine leaves with whoever she chose, AJ and potentially Sarah. With Omid or Kenny, they'd go to Wellington only to find out that they can't be let in. At least only the children can. But if Sarah is there, it'd be Clem and AJ or Sarah alone because Sarah's a bit older. They find out that nobody named Christa ever joined their community, and now they know she probably never will. Luckily for us, the endings of Season 2 are very similar to the canon ones, just with Sarah as an extra character if you kept her alive. Omid also has his own ending, but it was mostly the same as the Kenny ending in canon. No matter what, Sarah will end up dying or being lost during the time skip, as we cannot keep her around due to her status as determinant. Plus, it shouldn't be that hard to think of her dying out of all people. Since Clem got to pick between Omid, Kenny, and Jane at the end of Season 2, we can cross off the other two endings and just stick with Omid going into Season 3, as he's the only one that matters for this what if to continue. And just for the sake of the story, we're gonna hope he doesn't try to teach Clementine how to drive, or at the very least, he wears his seatbelt. Anyway, some time passes and the two get trapped and end up meeting Ava, who tells them about her group, the New Frontier, mentioning that she got separated from her friend recently. Luckily, that friend returns and saves them from the walkers, keeping them trapped. As Omid and Clementine investigate, they are shocked to see that this friend of Ava's is none other than Christa. Omid and Christa lock eyes, immediately dropping anything they're carrying as they run into each other's arms, embracing for the first time in years. Now I know almost no one is going to complain about me keeping Christa alive, but I do want to give some sort of explanation for those of you wondering if it's realistic. Even with Omid being there during the bandit attack in Season 2, Christa surviving isn't very likely, especially if Clem doesn't help him distract the raiders. If you look at my What If Lee Survived series, spoiler alert, you'll notice that they had Lee and Omid as extra people, and the whole group was together so they could better defend each other. So if it takes something of that level to keep Christa alive, I doubt Omid throwing a rock would make much of a difference. However, since Clem can help Omid distract them, I'd see Christa being more likely to escape in that path, albeit probably bearing some sort of wound. I'll say she's got a bad leg going forward. But honestly, the decision to keep Christa alive was chosen because I know things become really stale when a New Frontier focuses so much on Javi and his family. So to add an extra character just standing there in every scene is really boring. I try to stay realistic with these stories all the time, as that's pretty much the point of asking what if this happened. But for this one, I thought you'd enjoy it more if Christa and Omid could reunite. Plus, I'd love to explore how being separated and Christa's place in the New Frontier affects their relationship. So with that, let's finally continue. Due to Christa being a part of Ava's group already, Omid and Clem would join very quickly. I'd like to imagine Omid telling Christa all about what has happened in Season 2, how they reunited with Kenny, why they're now taking care of a baby, and how they actually went to Wellington. Christa is happy to hear that they made it, and she views AJ as a second chance for her after losing her own baby. Very much the same way that I talked about how Omid feels in Part 1. She'd tell them how she learned about the importance of groups when they saved her from a miserable fate of limping everywhere alone while barely surviving. How she made connections with Ava and David. When AJ gets sick, Omid and Clem are dead set on stealing medicine for him, with Christa being on board as well. Christa manages to snag the vancomycin when no one is looking, giving it to Omid in order to administer it to AJ away from the camp. However, Omid and Clem get attacked by walkers drawn from AJ's crying, forcing them to run back to camp. This awakens the others, and they fight the walkers. By the end, David demands an explanation from Omid and Clementine on why they were out with AJ. They struggle to create lies, but Lingard tells David the vancomycin is missing, causing him to immediately piece things together. Christa tries to defend her husband and Clementine, but ultimately David can't accept disobedience and thievery. So he banishes the two from the group, causing Christa to leave as well. They try to take AJ, but David refuses as he doesn't want him dragging them down. Christa has her leg injury, Clementine is still a kid, and Omid isn't exactly the most hardened survivor. Adding a toddler with extremely specific needs isn't going to help them out there. Without the means to stand up to David and the rest of the group, they're forced to part ways with AJ. However, later on, Ava approaches the three to make peace, giving them some supplies. She also gives them a drawing from AJ, telling Christa that she convinced David to let her come back if she wants to. He genuinely enjoyed having Christa around, and she's the closest person to Ava. Plus, she can keep AJ safer this way, assuming he does survive his sickness. Seeing this offer, Christa is torn, but Omid tells her that she should go. They both know how much AJ means to them, and having any way to ensure his safety is key, even if it means they won't see each other again. Christa ends up in tears, asking what about him, but Omid smiles and says that they've been gone without each other before. Everything will be okay. She's finally found people she can be with without being scared or worried about what they might do. She deserves to have that. And so, with much hesitation, Christa returns with Ava to the camp, leaving Omid and Clementine alone again. Some time passes, and Clementine ends up saving a man named Javier Garcia from a member of the New Frontier. She decides not to rob him, but does think he owes her his van. They go back to Prescott, where she introduces Javi to Omid, and they discuss the situation. Omid and Javier would likely find lots in common on the urgency of keeping families safe. Clementine confronts the guy who gave her dud bullets, but luckily she doesn't lose her temper too much due to Omid being there. Because of this, that guy makes it out alive after a rough up from Javier, and agrees to return double what Clementine paid in exchange for him walking out. The gang informs Trip of Javi's current struggle, prompting him to offer to take him to the junkyard tomorrow in order to help him out. Javier later also meets Eleanor, and she offers to take him to the junkyard that night. It's up to him which one he chooses, but Omid will only join assuming he goes with Trip, as he doesn't want to go behind his back like that. Omid being there doesn't change much, of course, as they all still escape with Clementine and possibly Javier staying behind to fight the New Frontier. We can then fast forward to Prescott being attacked, which also doesn't change, with the exception of Omid surviving. They work on a plan to make it to Richmond, but Omid would be more open about the situation both he and Clementine have with the New Frontier. He explains the story and how he has a life with them. Surprisingly, he's optimistic about all of them joining up again, even though both he and Clementine were kicked out. Maybe with a big place to call home, they can be reinstated. Due to this knowledge being out there, Conrad doesn't try to confront Clem and Javi, so he survives. He just has a more malicious plan for Clem and Omid, in that he hopes to sell them out for his group's safety. Clementine doesn't leave, since she wants to stick with Omid, and isn't quick to run away from her friends due to not losing everyone. Plus, Christa might be able to vouch for them, assuming she's still alive. By this point, they've met Jesus, and Omid points out the goofiness of his name. They eventually arrive at the gates of Richmond, and Conrad tells Max that they've got Clementine and Omid here and are willing to trade. This surprises everyone, but no one can fully react due to David showing up. He pretty much ignores Omid, who is asking him about Christa, as he's more concerned about his own reunion with his family. David takes Kate inside, and the others go into quarantine. He then returns to collect Javier and talks to Joan, only for Joan to kick Javi and his group out of Richmond. They go to the location, David leaves them, and he eventually shows up as well. Conrad dies if you don't give him his gun, so that is definitely very sad. Omid and Clem show some resentment toward David, but he informs them that Christa is safe and AJ survived his sickness. Christa took care of him, but she ended up relocating and he's not sure where. They'd have to ask Ava or Lingard, as those are the two people she was closest to. She wasn't exactly fond of him after making Omid and Clem leave, so she opted to isolate herself. The gang faces off against Max, Badger, and Lonnie, with Omid staying with Tripp and Conrad. After winning, Jesus parts ways, and everyone else goes back to Richmond. Again, not too much is altered here besides Clem's conversation with Javi mentioning that Omid was too awkward to tell her anything about periods. Luckily, Ava gives the location of McCarroll Ranch to Omid and Clem, thus prompting them to leave Richmond and go after Christa and AJ. They give Javier their best wishes, hoping he's able to fix this mess. It is a possibility that Javi and Gabe have a tougher time pushing the truck without Clem's help, but I'm sure that they can still do it. Joan ends up capturing Tripp and Ava, resulting in Javier being forced to choose between them. The episode's ending plays out the same, but with Clementine and Omid making a return, and Conrad doing the same if he's alive. They had second thoughts, leaving everyone to fight alone after becoming so close with Javier. Plus, with the herd, it's much harder to be safe while leaving. If they're risking their lives, it might as well be for the people they care about. Omid chooses to stay in Richmond to help those in need with Eleanor, as he remembers how he was after his injury in the first season. He would never have survived without people looking out for him, and he wants to do the same for others. So the rest of the episode plays out the exact same way, though maybe Kate could survive if Clem went to Richmond, since Omid would be there to help fight. By the end, Javi cuts Clementine's hair and says a final goodbye to her and Omid, hoping that they can reunite their family too. Clementine and Omid make their way to McCarroll Ranch, finding it burnt down. They fight their way through, coming across a man who nearly shoots them dead. Luckily, as he reloads, Clementine is able to get the jump on him. As Clementine questions this man, Christa makes her return, telling Clementine to stop. The two are happy to see each other again, but even happier is Omid. Christa introduces them to the man who tried to shoot at them, which is Eddie. Due to their time together at McCarroll Ranch, Eddie and Christa have become friends, so luckily Eddie gets to survive here. They get to the nursery, taking AJ as the woman there stays behind to go down with the ship. And so, over the next few years, we see Clementine, Omid, Christa, Eddie, and AJ travel together. Due to the size of the group, AJ is taken much better care of, and is nowhere near as hardened or scared or paranoid as he was in the game. They arrive at a station where not much has really changed. Christa and Omid do have a reaction to the couple that took themselves out, remembering the couple they found in the first season that did the same. Of course, a very gross and grim situation, exemplifying just how strong and lucky Christa and Omid are for finding each other again and again throughout all of this. I'd like to also maybe give some dialogue to Eddie here too, as he's the odd one out really. He doesn't have that much connection to anybody else here. He could try talking to Clem, making light of the situation that they just encountered, and maybe he even references past events that happened in the time skip. They eventually get chased by the walkers, causing them to fight their way back into the car. But because there are 5 of them and Christa has a bad leg, as I established in the last part, it takes longer to get everyone into the car. This results in Eddie being bitten on the arm whilst trying to fight off the dead and get everyone inside. They all eventually do, with Christa driving them away and not crashing since they had to clear more walkers to make it inside, so it'd be easier to navigate. After making their getaway, they stop to deal with Eddie and his arm. They cut it off with Omid referencing Reggie and how he survived a similar procedure. They just have to work fast. And hopefully they don't mention that Lee did not survive this procedure, because I don't think Eddie would take too kindly to that. But luckily they do end up getting the arm off, continuing to drive around, but don't end up with much result and run out of gas. Their only choice from that point is to head on foot back to the place that they found at the beginning of the game, as it at least had shelter and supplies. So they hoof it there, lugging a weakened Eddie around. Upon their arrival, they find a swarm of the undead, forcing them to make a plan. Omid rings a bell from a safe spot, drawing the walkers to him, while Clem and AJ go to the supply cache, and Christa keeps watch and makes sure Eddie stays safe. While they're gathering supplies, Clem and AJ are confronted by a man who asks for food. The same options are presented as in canon, to give him a bag of food or shove him out the window. Clem and AJ grab what they can before leaving with Christa and Omid, who pull Eddie around. Seems like staying there wasn't actually a secure plan due to the walkers. Sadly, I don't know if they could continue hauling Eddie without him losing more blood, gaining some kind of infection, or just being killed by the walkers chasing them. So that night, Eddie says his goodbyes to everyone, thanking them for helping him make it this far. Christa then puts him down before he turns, and the group sleeps in the forest. The next day, they bury Eddie and travel onward. However, during their travels, they notice someone talking nearby. They watch from a distance, seeing a blonde kid and a redhead girl talking to the guy from the station and an ally of his. I'm going to address all these characters by name to make things easy, though technically none of our characters would know them. Lily informs Marlon that she needs all of them now, with both him and Brody being shocked at this. Marlon exclaims that wasn't their deal, but Abel tells him to get over it. Lily assures him that at least his friends will have a better life, or at the very least, they'll die fighting a just cause. Brody begins panicking, and Abel groans at how weak she is. Lily tells Marlon to go back to the school and tell everyone that it's time to go. She's sure they're finding less and less resources around this place anyway. It'll be better for them. Marlon is forced to agree to these terms, with Brody telling them that this isn't right. They can't just take everyone and make them fight a war. Abel tells her to shut her mouth before she calls the dead, but Brody refuses to relent. Lily raises her gun, telling Marlon to get her in line, or she'll be forced to instead. Since none of them possess guns aside from AJ, Clementine can choose to tell him to shoot or not. If she tells him not to, then Marlon consoles Brody briefly before taking her back to the school. Lily and Abel follow them after a while, lurking nearby to surprise attack if they have to. This causes them to run into our guys, with a chase ensuing. Due to this, Christa ends up taking a shot from Abel's gun, but they do escape with the help from James. In the path where you have AJ shoot, he'd hit Lily in a spot that isn't fatal, and Lily and Abel chase them down sooner, as Marlon and Brody run off toward the school. By the way, the reason Christa takes the shot this time around instead of AJ is because A, she'd probably be trying to protect AJ, and B, she has a bad leg, so she would be the caboose of the group. Luckily, James does assist our group in hiding and helps get the bullet fragments out of Christa. The next day, Marlon and Brody return to the same spot to hopefully talk to Lily, but they don't find her. Instead, they find Clem and AJ, who introduce themselves and tell them that they heard their little dispute. If you had AJ shoot Lily, he'd reveal that he saved them. Marlon isn't so sure though, as now his people are scared. They know these guys are supposed to come and take them, but now they've seen others in the area, they're probably going to be even harsher. Brody freaks out again, but directs her fear to Clementine for getting involved. Marlon genuinely doesn't know what to do here, as his only option is to somehow convince everyone to give in. But AJ suggests they fight. As Clementine, you can agree or disagree, but either way, you'd have to talk to Omid and Christa first before making any big decisions. Marlon notices that if they escaped from Lily and Abel, and they're not in the community, they must know how to take care of themselves. His group has never really left their comfort zone, and their help might genuinely be what saves everyone's lives. So he asks Clementine for her help, causing her to go back and talk to her group. They agree to meet in the same spot again the next day with a decision. So Clementine goes back to talk with Omid and Christa, and Omid doesn't want to see a bunch of kids get drafted into a war, so he's pretty down to help them fight. Christa isn't so sure due to her losing Eddie, being wounded, and not in the best condition to fight. But Omid does say that if they've got a place and a group, they might have a better place for Christa to rest, and maybe they have supplies that could help her. So with AJ and Omid's votes for it, Clementine can really only tie things up, which would force Christa to abstain, which is a nice reference to the first season. This means they're going through with it, and they meet Marlon again, but this time, he has Lewis and Violet there instead of Brody. When asked why, he'll say that he wanted to be able to defend a bit better since Clementine was bringing her whole group. Plus, Brody isn't too happy about all this, so it's best for her to stay behind to avoid a negative reaction from her. Christa and Omid introduce themselves, with Marlon telling them that his group might not be too fond of adults being around again. And especially not if they're supposed to be training them or telling them what to do. But they'll just have to live with it. It's the only way they will live. On the way back, Lewis asks Marlon how exactly they found out about the evil guys coming to nab them, and Marlon would avoid the question. Our group does bring their bags of food from the train station, so the blow of their arrival is softened a bit, as the kids really haven't much to eat as of late. Clem can interact with all of them like she does in episode 1 in the original, but a lot of the kids show disapproval or question the validity of their help. They play the card game to help them learn more about each other, with Christa sitting out to rest, while Ruby reluctantly tends to her. Omid and Clementine share their experiences with Lewis, Violet, and Marlon, and AJ befriends Tennessee. The next morning, Clementine helps Mitch and Ruby inside the greenhouse, while Omid starts learning how to use a bow, causing more discussion about how these guys are meant to train them. Clementine makes a good name for herself, and Christa recovers from her injury pretty quickly since her body is a bit more resilient than AJ's. Due to her survival experience and combat training from the New Frontier, she'd be able to teach the kids plenty of stuff, causing more people to appreciate their help. Omid is a really chill guy, so they'd come to like him once the actual training positions are covered by Clem and Christa. Brody gets stressed out a lot, leading to a similar scene where Clem hears her and Marlon through the pipes. She goes to the basement, finding out the truth that Marlon traded Sophie and Minnie to Lily, and that he was planning on offering Clem's group to save his. This causes Marlon to lash out and hit Brody, before running away and trapping Clementine after Brody dies. Clem survives the encounter with the Walker, finding everyone questioning Marlon. She shows up, revealing the truth, causing everyone to turn on Marlon pretty quickly. They've known Clem and her group for longer than in the canon scene, so Marlon trying to invalidate Clementine's words isn't as credible. From here, Clementine chooses Marlon's fate, but the kids don't really agree on letting her have the decision. Since AJ is less unhinged, as I discussed previously, I don't think he'd kill Marlon here, so that's a plus. Instead, he'd be imprisoned, and the group goes over everything in the morning. Unfortunately, it does seem like Marlon will be needed to help fight, despite Violet and some of the others being upset at him. They chose to work with Clem and her group to survive, so unlikely allies aren't off the table. Marlon promises to right his wrongs during this battle, and Clementine can choose whether to be more caring and understanding, or brutally honest with him. But both are definitely motivating. Clementine can still romance Lewis or Violet, as while they have known each other for a few days less, they also didn't have any setbacks like AJ killing Marlon here. Lily and her squad start an ambush, and Clementine has her first real meeting with her, where the two officially recognize each other. Lily goads Ten into coming quietly, while Marlon yells not to believe her, but as it seems like Marlon is finally getting through, Mitch charges Lily and is killed. This is very sad, but luckily with Christa, Omid, and Marlon being here, it's an easier fight after that. I'd love to see Marlon save Clem from Abel, showing his dedication to undoing his mistakes. Omid can also save whoever Clementine fails to at the end, so the only losses are Mitch's death and Asim and Omar being captured. They interrogate Abel the next day, with Christa likely taking part. After learning the location of the Delta ship, Clem seeks out James, gaining his help with the herd. The party happens with Christa and Omid sharing their story about how they were always able to find each other throughout everything, and that they're not going to let this separate them. Marlon is apologetic about the situation and how he failed his group when they looked to him for leadership, but he is trying to be better, and he'll prove to all of them that he is still looking out for them. The attack on the ship goes the same, just with Christa handling the bomb and Marlon backing Clementine up. He wants to be on the front lines to feel like he's the one to go out first if they fail. Omid and the others rally outside, ready to help escape after the bomb goes off. Clem and Marlon get captured by Minerva, and Minnie is very clearly angry at Marlon for forcing her to live like this. After telling the parable of the twins, Lily takes Marlon up to the top of the ship in hopes of getting him to betray his group yet again. She also takes AJ after realizing he'd be a good soldier. Clem and the others escape, and Clementine makes her way up to fight Lily. With Marlon's help, they do win, and AJ ends up with the gun. Clementine could choose to make him kill Lily or not. If he doesn't, she nearly kills James, but Marlon takes it instead. He dies and the ship explodes, causing everyone to rush toward land. There, they briefly fight Minnie again and regroup. Clementine goes with AJ-10 and either James and Marlon, or just James, into a cave. There, James will be upset if you made AJ kill Lily, or genuinely remorseful at how Marlon took the hit for him. This makes him reconsider whether Lily should have been killed or not, causing him to stay behind in the cave and protect you like Marlon protected him. If James does attack Clementine though, Marlon would be there to defend her by calling her the strongest person he knows. This results in either James leaving or defending them by fighting off the dead. After finding Lewis/Violet, they travel on the bridge, and Marlon yet again tries to get through to 10 if he survived, and because of that, Tennessee will reject Minerva's offer, causing the group to begin escaping. However, Marlon ends up being shot by Minerva, so she ultimately gets her revenge as she meets her demise. This would mean that all the others survive though, so that is very good. Clementine also never gets a leg injury in the scenario, but more people to climb the walls means I think she'd still be bitten. It would take longer to get everyone up there, and I think Clementine would be holding up the back. Louis/Violet would be there during the barn scene, and AJ helping Clementine escape would be a bit more believable in that scenario. They make it back with Clementine losing her leg, but at least everyone is a happy family. Christa and Omid get the kids they always wanted, and a community to finally rest in after all of their struggle. And that's the end of What If Omid Survived, although it kind of became What If Omid and Christa Survived toward the middle. But, I mean, I don't think you guys are going to be complaining about that. I had lots of fun writing the story, and it was interesting to see where it differs from the normal what if blank survived scenarios. As always, I'd like to give a huge shout out to our channel members, Wax and Parrotfish, Paul Keen, Hazy Brush, Davisville84, Willie, Very Classy Demon, 23 Days Later, Aiden Kearns, Yeah, Zombie Warlord, Tifu A, and Chief Constituent. If you guys want to become channel members and also get access to awesome perks like early videos, priority comment replies, and exclusive community posts, then be sure to do so by becoming a channel member for only $2.99. But as always, tell me if you like this series, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.